Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Addiction. I am your host, Al Richards. Guys, we got a really great guest with us today. Today's guest is going to share his unique experience going from the top of the financial industry to a prison cell. So imagine yourself having pretty much things that you want. You know, you got the house, the lovely family, lovely wife, cars, toys, financial issues. There wasn't any really, right? And then running into an addiction and losing it all. And I don't want to share how this gentleman, how our guest ended up in a prison cell. I'm going to let him do that, but you guys definitely want to stick around and listen to this. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Kevin Baker. So Kevin, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you. This is it's an honor. It's really cool to be on here with you. I'm humbled, and I'm excited to have a conversation with you. So yeah, I guess I'll give you a little bit. Your intro paints the picture. So I grew up in the financial services industry. I fell into it almost by accident right out of college. And by the time I was 27 years old, I was a field wholesaler and making well into six figures. And by the time I was 30, I was averaging about $500,000 a year in income, which was crazy. So blessed, I was just so blessed to fall into it. It was hard work, but it was also enjoyable work. I worked with great people in a great industry, and we were well compensated. And as you said, Al, we had, I think, my first S-Class Mercedes. I was 31 years old, maybe. My wife had the big Suburban. I mean, we had the 3,500 square foot house and the nicest country club in the area. And it was all firing really well. It was a dream life. It really was. We started having children and living the American dream, season tickets to Fenway Park, which, is the greatest place on earth. But underlying all of that, when I was about 27, after spending the first 27 years of my life pounding the hell out of this unit, this body, playing basketball and soccer, I had developed a serious spine injury. And I remember somewhere around 27, 28 years old, playing basketball in a rec league in Newton, Mass. And I went to turn and everything locked and it was gone. So December of 1999, I was 29 years old, had my first spinal reconstructive surgery. I had screws inserted into my sacrum and into my lumbar 5, your bottom disc, and rods covering or connecting them. And the thing that was great about that is it gave me my mobility back, but the incredible amount of pain that I've lived in is never really abated. You just come to learn to live with it. Back then, the surgeon gave me Percocet. And for about 7 years after that surgery, sure, if I had a 30-day subscription for Percocet, I might have on day 27, been running out, but it was never crazy. I was on task and doing all right with it. And then I started to figure out that there was more going on with my spine again, about 8-10 years later. I had met a guy, it was actually ironically a business client, who asked me one day after hearing about my back, hey, what do you take? And I said, I take these Percocets. And he actually was the first one to ever show me and introduce me to a little tiny blue pill called an Oxy 30. And he said, these things, are incredible. And he had MS, so he was dealing with a lot of pain. And he gave me one, and I sat on it for a while. I figured, whatever. And then I remember one day, very vividly, sitting in the office that we had on the back of the house. And I finally looked at it. I said, you know what, screw it. And I swallowed that Oxy. And a handful of minutes later, I had a sensation. And every addict I've talked to, everybody who's gone down the opiate train ride has said the exact thing, where that first one was bang, pow, and it was euphoria. Angels singing, and everything was amazing, right?
Huh.
And then the other thing every addict has told me, they had the same experience I had, which was you then spend the days trying to get back to that first one, and you never get it. You never get that first high. And by then I started working with another surgical team, and they prescribed me the oxys. It was oxy 15s, a little less, but the same concept.
Yeah.
An entirely different drug than Percocet to me. Like I said, the perks were fine. Once I started taking those oxys, it rapidly accelerated, and I went in and out of trying to get off them. I sat down with my wife and confessed to her that I was getting addicted to these things, and we sought help. And I went to a group counseling, heroin group counseling here in Connecticut. And I was in and out of that, on and off. I was listening to your interview with Brendan Hermanson last month, and he talked about Suboxone, which I was on as an anti-opiate. And it did help, it helped get me off. And I would go 4, 5, 6 months maybe, and then relapse. And that went on for a handful of years. Had the second back surgery. So now I had more screws in my lower back and more access to oxys from the surgeons. And as I accelerated, I started finding ways. And the first one was forging prescriptions from my surgeon. For some reason, instead of the little pad you get, you see the doctors with the little pad. For
Yeah.
some reason, this particular surgical office printed on a regular printer an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that had your prescription written out, and then they would sign it, and off you would go. I mean, it couldn't have been easier, right? Um, I would take that, photocopy it, take a blue pen and retrace the signature so the signature stuck out. And I got away with that probably a dozen times, of going into grocery store pharmacies and basically cashing this faulty prescription check, if you will. And again, it just kept accelerating. It got to a point where well, like we said, there was great financial success. And in 2012, I left the corporate side to start my own business. And because my addiction had really started to accelerate, my head and my heart were not in it. So leaving the corporate side, where I had the backing, if you will, of a great company, and going out on my own, I didn't have the discipline nor the drive because of my addiction. And I know that for a fact. I lost hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to build this business. I trusted some wrong people, and that just accelerated it. And again, we talk in addiction about its cohorts being depression and anxiety. And I just got into a vicious vortex of depression, guilt, anxiety. I was now buying pills, Oxy 30s, for about, let's just round it out to $30 a pop.
Jeez.
And when you're doing 10 a day, you can do the math. That's an expensive day.
Yes, it is.
By the time 2015 rolled around, I was doing 30 a day. I was walking into the Bank of America every few days, taking out $5, $6, $7,000 in cash. I had a whole story that I was rehabbing houses, and the guys who worked for me wanted to be paid in cash. And that was how I, explained to the tellers how every few days I'm coming in there raiding this, war chest of IRAs and 401ks, and even the girls' 529 plans, I'm ashamed to say, were raided and converted to cash. And by the end of 2015, I was basically alive, just sitting there on a daily basis, trying to figure out how and if I would kill myself because of the shame and the guilt that was going on in my head. Knowing I was bankrupting this family, knowing I was taking so much away. We quit the country club. I sold the cars and, well, smaller cars, if you, for lack of a better
Yeah.
description,
Yeah.
and really started downsizing. And I was able to, I know, you and I talked about your relationship with your wife. With my wife, she, in hindsight, kind of knew, but then I was so adept, and the financial problems we were having, I was attributing to the business that blew up and not to my addiction. So I kind of had myself covered from that aspect, where my wife wasn't asking much questions when we were selling stuff. When she watched me load up the car with a couple of extra TVs and stereos that, sometimes got used, but I went to the pawn shop with them. When I went and sold my wedding present from her, which was a Rolex, for cash, and that was about a day and a half worth of pills, was the Rolex. So the bank started calling, as I had missed payments on the mortgage, along with other creditors. And I also had gotten into about $30,000 of debt with two different dealers who I was buying pills from. Interesting side note is, my main dealer had cut me off, knowing that I was going in and out of this rehab. And he actually had a conscience. This is where addiction took me, Al. I invented a subset of people that I was buying pills for, because the only way Steve would continue to sell me pills was me swearing that, no, this is for guys I know. I'm just now the middleman. So again, addiction has many ways. And when you're lying to your drug dealer, that might be, I talk about my addiction in terms of, like, I try to use the metaphor of being on a train, right? And those of us who have been, whether it's alcohol, pills, pot, whatever the addiction, I think I've talked to a lot of people who can get their head around the metaphor. We're just riding a train. And at various stops, we are given the opportunity repeatedly to get off the train. On one platform, it might be your wife who's there willing to help you. On another platform, it might be your friends or your counselor, and you keep going. And I unfortunately stayed on the train and kept riding it and riding it. And okay, see you later. One guy gets off, goes to rehab, goes to successfully a 28-day program, but I stayed on that train, man. And so the bank's calling at the end of 2015. We are literally broke. The depths of my despair, I can't even, I was gone, man. I was ready to kill myself and get it over with, but I couldn't leave that legacy for the kids.
Yeah.
But I would sit there on a daily basis. Once the kids left for school and my wife went to do her stuff, I acted as if I was going to go in my office and do the work, keep trying to build this business. But the reality was, I would just get on the couch and function for the day, to snort pills, watch whatever was on TV, intermittently fall in and out of sleep, and try to figure out a way to kill myself.
Jeez.
I had friends financially help me out, thousands of dollars, not here's $60, not knowing, again, that I was using all my money to fund pills. But again, the business failing gave me a cover.
So
And
Kevin,
so,
can I
yeah.
pause you for a minute, Kevin? So there wasn't any kind of like physical change in you at all, to where people could start seeing your personality changing or anything like that? I mean,
yes, there
okay,
was.
all right.
In hindsight, though, because a lot of friends after, I'll talk about my epic blow up, said, yeah, I kind of saw things, my weight, lose 20 pounds when I went back on pills after a good 6 months on Suboxone and fighting the fight on the right side. So there was a lot of that. The other thing, Al, that especially opiate addicts and I have all talked about, is it goes from chasing that first high to, at some point, becoming, the usage is about maintenance. my wife would say, well, how could you be high and drive around? And I was explaining to her that me and several others I've talked to, I wasn't in my mind getting high anymore. I was maintaining, because when you go off opiates and you're not in a program where they can manage it, taper it with Suboxone or something, when you go off opiates, you go into withdrawal, and it is akin to the worst flu you can ever imagine times 1,000. Throwing up and everything coming out every which way, shakes for hours on end, the jimmy legs or the muscle twitches, the sweating for half the night, then freezing. So my addiction was about kind of keeping my body physically and mentally able to even get up and move. Again, the cover, having young children in kindergarten, was when I would go into withdrawal, when there wasn't pills to buy, right? And I would go into a 4 or 5 day withdrawals. I tell my wife I must have picked up a bug from the kids. They go to kindergarten every day. It's a germ pool. Of course,
Right.
I'd be sick. And again, she looks back on it, and there were, when you have the flu from the kids 6, 7 times within a year, again, the train stop, right? You know
Yeah.
how to say, those are the worst days of your life when you are in withdrawal and can't get pills. And the other thing, though, is I would lay in bed for 3, 4, 5 days, but as soon as the dealer got hooked up again and called me, I was out. I was running out the door, and all of a sudden the flu was gone.
Yeah. The flu. Yeah. I was going to say the flu's disappeared, right?
Yeah. So all of that, I'll cut to the chase. After some family members, my uncle had loaned me thousands of dollars trying to, keep up appearances and, quite frankly, keep giving my wife and children a nice life. One morning in January of 2016, and this wasn't a plan, I didn't plot it out for days. I woke up one morning, and for some reason, Al, I thought of going and robbing a bank. And it was the first time that that thought had entered me. And so I spent that morning thinking about it, thinking about a bank here in my town. But then it came to me, my father had been progressively getting ill, and I was power of attorney for him and managing his money. And there's a very small rural bank that he banked out of. And all of a sudden, I found myself driving to that bank on this particular morning, knowing that it was very small. It was right near the airport. So there were many ways to jump on the highway, what have you. But I think the main reason is I knew it was literally 4 women, no men working in the branch. So I knew it wouldn't become a physical confrontation with a guard or a mail teller. And before I knew it, I ran into this bank, and I robbed it. I walked out, or ran out, with $15,000. And instead of putting that money where it should have gone, which was to pay the bills, much of it went to buy more pills, And I, uh, 2 weeks later, not even 2 weeks later. So the first one was January 28th. And then again on February 8th, still being in a hole and still having the mortgage company call and having the cable be in, risk of having that shut off. I went into the same bank 2 weeks later and robbed the same 4 women. And it's the biggest shame of my life what I put these women through.
Probably
I,
scared the heck out of them, right?
yeah, one of them retired, which I understand. I have 4 daughters. I did have a knife with me on both occasions. Again, it wasn't like I had this master plan. I think in my mind that day, if you go rob a bank, you're supposed to have a gun or something. So I didn't have I've never touched a gun in my life. So I went in with this knife. In hindsight, I think the knife was about creating a halo around me where the women would stay instead of one of them trying to grab me and I would, have to push her off. But it was horrible. The first time I literally got my car and drove off, and I got right on the highway, and 20 minutes later I was meeting my dealer, Um, like I went up there and made a withdrawal that I had been doing for years. And 2 weeks later, I went in, and this time it didn't go well. Somebody saw me run across the street, get in my truck, and before I knew it, I was getting chased by about 30 different police officers over about an hour through backcountry roads, 80 miles an hour, thinking, do I drive through this tobacco field up here in northern Connecticut? I got chased into Massachusetts at one point. They put towns on lockdown. Tried to get me with the strips, the spike strips.
Yeah.
I beat them to the intersection. It was so, but they got a partial plate, and they put it together within a few days. And on Saturday, February 13th of 2016, at about 6 o'clock, they showed up at my house and called and asked me to step outside. The police did, under the guise of, they said, we understand you're in the house. A friend of yours called and said you're suicidal. Can you come out? We've got an officer out. We just want to do a wellness check on you. And what do you? I'm fine. I hung up, and they kept calling. So finally, I stepped out in front of my house, and then realized my driveway was lined by officers with automatic weapons and riot shields. There were dogs and police officers coming out of the woods. There were 4 or 5 police officers with guns drawn in the driveway. And I was arrested. Well, I wasn't arrested at that point. They didn't have all the warrants. So that night I spent in my house. Fortunately, my wife talked to them earlier in the day, unbeknownst to me. And they said, we're coming to arrest your husband and explain what was going on. So she took the girls. So they didn't have to see, their father get cuffed and drawn out of the house at gunpoint. I mean, short of the helicopter, it was kind of like the movies where they had me out yelling at me to get down on the ground, down on my knees. I remember I had a muscle spasm and started to move. And the officer later told me, he's like, you're lucky you didn't get one in the back of the head. We thought you were getting up. So the next morning they came back with the warrant, and that was February 14th. I don't know if you can see my tattoo.
Definitely see it. Yeah.
2016. That was the day that I was arrested. But
so that's Valentine's, right?
Yes,
Isn't
it is.
Valentine's on the 14th?
It is. So again, Katie and the girls weren't there, but tongue in cheek, I was, I'm going to prison, honey, and happy Valentine's Day. And by the way, we're broke, and yeah, I love you. And off I went on Valentine's Day. Yeah. And with the work that I put in and some amazing people, I've come to have a whole different perspective. And the reason I have February 14th is to remind me of the day that the Connecticut State Police saved my life. There was no way I would have still been alive come April 1st with where I was mentally, with the darkness and the shame. I would have either overdosed somehow. Fentanyl was just then starting to make its way in. So I kind of dodged that, I think, just by the timing. But so I would have either overdosed, crashed my car racing to go meet a dealer before he took off, or finally succumbed to the voices and found a way to kill myself. So
Kevin, I just can't even imagine that you made it as long as that you did. I believe earlier you said that you were around 30 Oxycontin a day, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
I just can't even imagine functioning. No. I mean, I had a partner, I'll just put it that way, who was hooked on Xanax, and she would take 20 to 30 a day. And I mean, sometimes I'd come home and it's like, it's this totally different person. Right.
Yeah.
I just couldn't even imagine how, I mean, even when I've talked about it a few times, people are like, how the heck was she still alive? I'm like, I don't know. I guess the body builds up a tolerance for it.
There you have it.
You start kind of getting used to it. It's kind of like my wife with her drinking, I mean, she's 5'2", weighed 115 pounds, and she's pouring liquor in her like there is no bottom.
right.
And there were times when I looked her in the eye, I saw death. I mean, literally, it's like I was looking in a freaking black hole when I'd look into her eyes. But she still wouldn't pass out. She couldn't function. She
Right.
couldn't talk. She couldn't stand up. She could barely stand up on all fours, but yet she wouldn't pass out. And I remember times just even praying, just going, please just pass
Just
out so I could
yeah,
have some peace,
I
please.
hear you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was the tolerance. My wife asked, how the hell did you get my lawyer asked, and my friends in hindsight have asked, how the hell did you get to 30 a day and not die? And it was not, one and then 30. It was one and five, and you build up a
Yeah.
tolerance. Um, and as that vortex spun more and more, um, I just found myself doing more and more pills. And there wasn't a minute of the day that if I had them and I wasn't in a withdrawal situation, that I didn't have them on my body. And even when we did go out places, I would search out the bathroom as fast as I could to be able to go in there. Because my method, if you will, of taking these pills was not popping them, it was snorting them. It was
Wow.
crushing them and snorting them, which is, again, you go back to the gentleman who gave me my first. After I took it, a few months later, he said, "Yeah, dude, you ought to really, smash it and snort it." And that became an on and off again excuse. I have allergies because 24/7, I was stuffed up, and you could hear it, you could see it, you would hear me snorting because of all the pills. But again, I'd say, no, no, I got allergies. I mean, it's 4 degrees out in December, but I somehow
You
hay
had
fever,
allergies.
my hay fever. So yeah. So on February 14th, 2016, I was arrested. I was processed. I took my last oxy pill actually in police custody. I had come home that afternoon after a purchase. I think I had 20 pills. And that night, I ended up, even under police watch, they stayed in my house while they got the warrant, claiming, um, what's the damn word? Circumstances. They were afraid I was going to destroy evidence and such.
Okay. Yeah.
So they basically watched me until they came back. It's two state police stay in my house and watch me every move I made. But I finally convinced them I'm going to the bathroom, leave me alone. And the last two pills I took were actually after I was processed and in the Hartford State Police office and asked to use the bathroom and popped them in my mouth. And that was the last two pills I've ever taken, man. And God willing, they'll be the last two I ever do take. And I wake up. I don't think about pills on a daily basis. I don't have the, not I guess the traditional battle. I'll be honest,
Yeah.
but I'm vulnerable like any of us, man. I'm vulnerable like any of us. That rock bottom. I was on the news for weeks. Front page of the Hartford Courant here. It was a big deal. They still played me as this big, rich financial guy. And they didn't really realize that this big, rich financial guy from 3 years ago is now. And I tell people I left MetLife in 2012, probably worth about 2.3 million. And by the end of 2015, I was in an office in Hartford, Connecticut, applying for basically food stamps, the program of food stamps, because of my addiction and because of spending that kind of money on it. So I was arrested. That first week, well, I mean, the truth is out that when they brought me to Hartford County, they put me in a suicide watch cell. They have such things. Um, and after the arrest and all that went with that mentally, the only reason I am still here is that in a suicide watch cell, there's nowhere to tie up the sheet because I tried. Um, I sat there for a few days, the first few days, going into detox, knowing that I had ruined my wife and daughter's lives, embarrassed my parents. And as your intro, basically coughed up an amazingly blessed life that I had,
Yeah.
all for these damn pills, man. And I remember sitting in the cell. I actually took the sheet, tied it around, but I couldn't, I got to that point. I talk about it openly, but it's hard because it's hard admitting that I gave up. And if there was some place, I then remember thinking, if I climb up on this little toilet here in the cell and just jump head first, can I hit my head hard enough on the cement floor to end life? And in the end, I didn't have the temerity to do that, I guess. So thank God for that.
Yeah.
So that was it, man. A
You
few days
know,
later, I finally got to call my wife, and the first thing that happened a few days later is I realized, with love beyond measure, that I was still valued, and that phone call saved me from the darkness for that rest of that week
yeah.
and the weeks to come. That,
So Kevin, I want to go back into this. Okay. I'd like to stop for a quick commercial break, but for the
sure.
second half, I'd really like to hear you finish this, because, and I believe you and I spoke about this when we had our phone conversation about a month ago.
Mhm.
I believe I shared a little bit of me wanting to take my life,
Yeah.
even though I was on the other side, and the phone call with your wife, saved you from the darkness, and a phone call pretty much saved me as well. Right. So it's kind of crazy how the two are kind of joined together, but yet we were both on different sides of the track per
Right.
se. So you guys stay with us. We're going to stop for a quick commercial break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to let Kevin finish up this other side and where his life is taking him right now. So guys, we'll be right back. Stay with us. Do you know someone who's gambling with death due to an addiction? Do you know someone whose life is being turned upside down due to a loved one that's battling with addiction? Hi, I'm Al Richards. I am the host of the Other Side of Addiction podcast. I started the podcast due to my wife's battle with alcohol. Let's just say I became addicted to her addiction. Our podcast is helping people understand a little more about those who have battled addiction and those who are hurting from their addiction. Through raw vulnerability, we share stories that help uncover the root causes of addiction. Shame felt on both sides, matter of the conscious and subconscious mind, continued beliefs, and often confusing paths of recovery. We collaborate with real people and their stories, as well as licensed professionals, to help our audience gain a better understanding of addiction. You can find us on Resilience Talk Network. You can also find us on Facebook at Mr. Al Richards. That's Facebook at Mr. Al Richards. You can also find us on YouTube. Just look up the Other Side of Addiction podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Other Side of Addiction. We are here with our special guest today, Kevin Baker. Kevin, again, man, thank you so much for being on the show. And I just want to give a shout out to my brother, my good friend, Curtis Marsh, for introducing us, right? He's the one that reached out. You spoke with him, and I know Curtis thinks the world of you. He has talked to me about you, and when he reached out to me, he says, "Man, I got this guy that I just think the world of. I really think you guys need to be in touch with one another." And then, of course, we connected and we talked. And I think I was at a job up there in Sandy, Utah here, and we was speaking with one another. I think we were on the phone for a little over an hour.
We were, yeah, we were.
Yeah.
And same thing with Curtis and a few other who you introduced me to. It's amazing when you find people who, like you, like Curtis, and like the gentleman my Uncle Les, I call him, he's been my mentor for my whole career. He's now 7 years sober, and he introduced me to Curtis. Said, "I got a guy you got to meet."
Yeah.
But the point, Al, is with an open mind, um, the gifts that are presented to us from different places, uh, they're there every day. And
Absolutely.
I believe wholeheartedly that there is something more than what we see on the surface, and everybody can have their different version, whether it's God, Allah, whatever it may be. There is I believe, a force, or even if you believe in the force, George Lucas.
Yeah. Right.
But there is something that um, we are presented with opportunities, and meeting you was a gift. Meeting Curtis is a gift. And in my past life in addiction, and my wife would actually comment on it, I was closed. I don't want to meet anybody. We belong to this wonderful country club, and there were some wonderful people there. Um, I'd go to some of the things, but why do we want to make friends? Why do you want to go to this thing? And in addiction, I became very closed. I didn't want to meet anybody. And it became, she describes it, that the outward world saw me as very aloof, and I was making all this money. I had the car, I had this, I had that. We vacationed on the water every summer. Um, the reality is I was living most of those years in such guilt and shame, and the addiction of the pills. I didn't want friends. I didn't want to be out there. It wasn't being aloof. It was more driven by my relationship with those little blue pills, triumph to anything.
Yeah.
So,
And we fall into it, not even realizing we're falling into it, right?
yeah,
It's crazy. And you've even shared quite a few times that, we always seem to find a reason, an excuse, right? I definitely have learned that addicts are definitely some of the most best manipulators and liars out there.
yeah.
So it's yeah, it could be easily done, and it's like nothing, right? It's just everyday life, and there's nothing to it. Right before we went to our commercial break, you were talking, Kevin, about you're in your cell, you're on suicide watch, you tie the sheet around your neck. Fortunately, there is no place to tie this, right? That's the reason why they have the cells the way that they have them. You're thinking of other ways. The guilt and the shame that you felt, I could not imagine. Okay. I can't say I could, because I've not been in those shoes. We've had guests on our show that definitely know exactly what you're talking about. I'd like to throw out there those two so our listeners understand. I don't really know where your wife was at that time. I know when my wife was in the depths of her addiction, the guilt and the shame even that I felt being on the other side, and I believe a lot of my guilt and shame too was, yeah, I didn't want friends to know about it because I didn't want them to judge her. I didn't want family to know about it because, again, I didn't want them to think less of her or judge her. But I also think a lot of that had to do with me hiding my secret of my cocaine and drinking use on the weekend for 8 years, and hiding it behind my wife because she didn't know. She knew I was drinking. She never could figure out how I could maintain and not get as hammered as I was with all the alcohol I was drinking. And it's like, well, that's easy. You level yourself off. You start getting too drunk, you snort a couple lines, you bring yourself back. And then if you start getting too high, you take some more shots and you level yourself back out. It's that constant balancing act. And I believe I felt also where a lot of my guilt and shame was coming from was because we had a house. I had a job of 24 years. My wife finally met a man that really gave a crap about her and also had a steady job, right? And worked hard. And lying to her and going behind her back, I basically shamed her, right? I mean, I disrespected her. And I swore that when I got married again, I was going to do everything I could to be the best freaking husband as possible. Cause I had been married a few other times as well. And I thought I was a pretty good husband, but I go back and I look and I wasn't as good as I could have been, right? I could have been a lot better partner. I didn't start off very well, man. I started off lying to her, and doing this crap behind her back. And with you talking about the suicide, I thought about killing myself as well, coming home from a networking group because I just couldn't handle coming home to what I came home to on a daily basis. You set a phone call with your wife, if I'm not mistaken, basically kind of reached down and pulled you out of that dark area that you were in. And the same thing happened to me. So I'd like you to go into that just a little bit more so people understand how that helped you.
Yeah, so I was arrested on Sunday, February 14th, which was Valentine's Day, as we said. Monday was a holiday, it was President's Day, so I wasn't brought to court to be arraigned until Tuesday. And when they brought me to court, I was already starting withdrawal, so I was already a wreck. And they brought me into the town closest to the bank, which is a small town. I pled not guilty because of the public defender's advice, if you will. But I walked in that court and my wife was sitting there. And I remember seeing her. I obviously was not allowed to speak to her. But that was all I saw. And it wasn't until Wednesday night that a guard, a CO, actually finally had a little compassion after me begging for hours on end to make a phone call. And there, it's not like you see in the movies, or I get my phone call. When you're in prison, you have to set up this tree, and the numbers you put on have to be approved. And then those people have to accept the call and actually fund an account. So it's a process. But that Wednesday night, she got on the phone. Our then 12-year-old got on the phone, and the first words out of her mouth were, "Daddy, I love you. I forgive you." And that that was power,
That put
And
tears in my eyes.
although then the shock came from the 5-year-old who got on the phone. So Reagan lifted me up, and then the youngest one got on the phone, and she's 5 years old. Her father's, how is she processing this? And she says, "Daddy, did you know that you were taking other people's money?" So the air came in and then went out with that one. That was a shot through the heart. But my wife got on the phone and said, "Listen, I don't know where you are mentally, but I can imagine knowing you. And I'm telling you right now, you got to fight for me and these girls." And again, love beyond measure.
Wow.
Saved my life, that phone call. And so I dealt with what I had to deal with. I was sent to a couple of different prisons, one for a psych eval. And once they determined that I was not a risk to myself a few weeks in, um, I was sent to what was then Connecticut Supermax facility. Because I had such a high bond on me. Again, they thought I was a multimillionaire, that if they granted me bond, I was going to end up living on a beach somewhere for the rest of my life. They didn't realize that. And again, this is the raw, honest side of where addiction takes you. So they put a $750,000 bond on me, figuring I would run. What they didn't know is no more than maybe a week before that, I sat in the kitchen looking at this ceramic piggy bank, which belonged to one of our girls. Wondering how many pills are in that piggy bank if I smash it open. So here I am again, the soccer dad, the successful financial guy, the alpha male. Here I am pondering stealing from my child's piggy bank. So, anyways, back to the jail thing. I got I got lucky with a few people. It's people say, "Oh, I got there. I got a mentor," but a couple of guys, and quite frankly, younger guys, when I was first in, kind of said, "This is what it's going to be like, dude, and this is what you need to do." And I immediately got counseling. Met a wonderful counselor who helped me start processing stuff. but it did take probably well beyond 18 months to really give up castigating myself and starting to think about the future. Excuse me for that.
No
Um,
worries.
and starting to think about what I could or couldn't do going forward with my life and what I needed to do, which was figure it out, man, and realize that sometime, again, having been saved on February 14th and again on that Wednesday night from that phone call, I was still alive, man. And I started to find, with help from people in prison, again, a couple counselors here and there, a couple inmates here and there, but a lot from my parents and family and friends who really kind of wrote me letters of support, and several saying, man, I got to tell you, you really gave me a wake up call. I got a handful of those letters saying, thank you. Your collapse really got me to look in the mirror and realized, again, that train out, right? So here
Yeah.
was a stop where they got to see the super epic public blow up of Kevin Baker. And some of them said, all right, this is where I got to get off the train, right? And they
Yeah.
took that exit. And so I, started processing it and started finding the light through various sources and people. And, when I was younger and before all this, I was always an optimist. I was just raised to be an optimist, and that started coming back. And I started realizing through these people that I could and would have a future. I didn't know what it would look like. But I began that, coming bouncing back, if you will. And was released to a halfway house in May of 2021 and worked down there about 40 miles from my hometown, which was good to be down there and have a period of adjustment, from prison life to having a little bit of freedom, but not having to worry about my friends in a hometown and a family just yet. I needed that transition, if you will. So I was down there for a while, and slowly worked my way back up, and slowly started having a relationship with my children again at my wife's request. She was still not sure if we would ever be together, but she put all that aside, knowing that these girls, even though I was a convicted felon, needed a father. And again, it's another example of how the other side for me, my life, put so much aside for the benefit of others, because she
Yeah.
was not, about having her husband back at that point, you know. Um,
Strong woman. Very strong woman.
on that phone call on that Wednesday night, I remember telling her, if there's any person on this planet who can navigate the mess, the colossal mess I just made, it's you. And she is the strongest person I've ever known. I've been blessed, and a handful of things have transpired, but to close out kind of the whole cycle. So I spent 6 years in prison, basically. Um, Worked on myself mentally, worked on myself spiritually. Had a very good friend who became my spiritual advisor, if you will. She was on me. She got on my visiting list, and had other friends, start talking to me about a career in public speaking, which is kind of what I did when I was in financial services. I did mostly public speaking on behalf of the companies. And said, listen, dude, when you get out, I had one person visit me who was, in essence, my fifth daughter. She used to work for me, and she came to see me. She flew in from out of state on a special visit while I was in prison. And she sat there and she said, Kevy, you're a train wreck, and people will pay to see a train wreck. And you're a damn good speaker, so put it together. And so I built this platform where I'm starting to do public speaking. And Al, listen, if I can make a living and make a difference, it's cliche. It's weird even to say, but it's true, man.
Yeah.
If I can help put these girls through college and every so often have somebody walk up to me after I do a presentation and say, hey man, thanks, you know, then I think it'll all be worth it, you know.
You
The
know,
irony is, I'll close on this one point about my life with my wife, and we're still working on things. But in February of last year, I just finally moved back up into this area to a sober house. And some things transpired, and she called me one day and said, listen, would you consider moving into the house? I need help. You know, she's been 6 years by
yeah,
herself, taking these girls, you know, selling the house, seeing everything that they were grown up, you know, gone. And she asked me in February and said, would you consider moving in the house? I need help. You know, I called my parole officer and explained to her, and she was all for it. She said, I would love to reunite families. And so she said, let me do my background check and talk to your wife. I'll go to the house and see and make sure. So, Al, I got a call on a Monday in February a year ago from my parole officer, and she said, you're good to go. You can move your stuff in tonight if you'd like. And so I got back into town from a job I was working at and grabbed my stuff from that sober house and brought my 5 boxes. I have a blog I wrote that everything I now own basically fit, and I keep it. Everything I now own fit in 5 boxes, man. So I left in cuffs from this house full of everything, and now everything I own is in 5 boxes. And it's humbling, but it's very liberating. If, again, the big message I have is perspective and looking at things differently, and not looking at February 14th as the worst day, but the best day.
yeah.
And so that's where I'll close. That February day that she called me and said, you can move in with your wife and children again. Guess what day of the year that was?
It was the 14th.
Yep. So 6 years to the day after being carted off by the gendarmes in cuffs, I was back.
Wow.
We're still working. There's still a lot to heal from, but we're doing it. We're doing it together, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And they are all so supportive of what I want to do with the rest of my life and build this speaking platform. And they've been not only behind it, but largely inspirational to it. One of our daughters has gone through her own trials. And this kid keeps getting hit and she keeps standing right back up, man. And so who am I not to come back and stand up after what I did, you know?
Yeah.
So that's my story.
I wanted to say earlier, Kevin, you know, when you were talking about the day they came and arrested you, being on Valentine's, what a Valentine's present for your wife, right? However, also at that same time, you mentioned some things where I'm like, that day could have been very tragic, which I'm sure it still was, but also at the same time, that day was a huge blessing because you mentioned earlier that day pretty much probably saved your life, right? It also got others to open their eyes, going, oh my gosh, if this happened to Kevin, it could happen to me. So there's more blessings. The blessing 6 years later on the exact same date, you get the thumbs up to move back in. There's another blessing that comes out of it. The lessons even probably that your children learn, at least the ones old enough to understand and know what's happening, there's a blessing. And this individual that you said that used to work with you, talking about the train wreck and doing the public speaking, and you even said it, to be able to go out there and help others understand, there's another blessing. So I guess what I'm saying here, and I get tears in my eyes talking about it as well, because I lost my job of 24 years due to my addiction, right?
Yeah.
My wife fell into her addiction as I was coming out looking for me, like you did yourself, trying to find out who I was as an individual. And I go back and I start really connecting the dots backwards, and I start finding out, man, every single bit of this has been a blessing. Hasn't been a curse, right? It's been a blessing. It's put you and I right where we're supposed to be right now in our life. And for you wanting to do the public speaking, just like I want to do the public speaking as well. I've been working on trying to get more gigs and really building this show and get people to understand what this show's about. Saving someone else, if someone can hear our message, if let's just say 100 people, 200, 300 people saw this show, if it freaking helped one individual, everything all of us have been through was worth that, right? Because it's going to continue to snowball, because that individual, just like the person you were talking about who was an addict, right, and has been helping you, it continues to snowball.
Yeah, it really does.
So maybe we might only not even know who we're helping, but it's helping.
I've been remiss that my oldest daughter, who's now 25, and she became my real rock while I was away, Al. And she kept, reminding me of the light. And every year, on February 14th, she's right on me saying, "Congratulations, Dad, on another year." I was, again, blessed by family to be able to pull myself back, if you will. Sydney, my oldest daughter, was my rock for a lot of it, along with my dad. And her message to me again was, "You got a lot of good to do," And again, it sounds cliche, and even like the old me might roll my eyes when somebody says it. But and I think you're very brave doing what you do and having this discussion with people and putting it out there. People have commended me on, "Oh, you're great to do this." And to me, there's no choice whatsoever in the matter. I don't have a choice whether to not do this or to do this. To me, it just is the path that, doing this and going forward. And again, I'm not going to pretend I'm not trying to make a living with the speaking thing, but
Right.
it's not about buying a Mercedes anymore. It's about putting these kids through school, and giving my wife some financial relief. But I couldn't have gotten here without Sydney and Katie and all the wonderful people in my life. And to hear and watch your interviews and your podcast, from the other side, which is a big part of my message and my platform when I speak. One word is perspective. And having a different perspective on things has opened my eyes up. And your whole other side of addiction, just in our conversation today, there's already going to be a talk with my wife tonight on some things I've learned that I didn't maybe think of, from her side, the other side of addiction. But again, we can look at it as a positive or a negative in our lives. And we have the choice to take things that happen to us and either suffer or grow. I talk in my speeches that pain is natural as a human. It's our body's way of telling us something's wrong. And that goes for emotional and mental pain as well. It's a real thing. But to me, one of the things I've learned with perspective is suffering, though, is a choice. So regardless of what's going on, you do have a choice, whether you want to suffer or move forward. And people have come back from far greater holes than I put myself in. But like I said, I stayed on that train a lot longer than many people. I think, to me, the only stop beyond the stop that I got off, the stop which had me running into a bank and driving 80 miles an hour and putting so many people's lives in dangerous situations and scaring everybody and everything that goes with it, right? The stop that I finally got off, I believe there's only one stop beyond that, which unfortunately does happen all too much. And that's the stop where a life is lost because of addiction, whether it be suicide or whether it be a drunk driver or whether it be a father who nods off and rolls the truck with the kids in the back, which could have happened to me on any given, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's it's a getting off of that stop, man. It's good. It's good to be alive, man, and it's good to have friends and make more friends, and realize that there's a lot of us out there, like you said, man, who are willing to lend a hand. And if one person comes up to you after a meeting, after a speech or a podcast, I know for you and just our short friendship that means a lot to you, man.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
it means the world to me, you know.
Yeah, it's it's crazy. Brad Newfield, who owns the studio Resilience Talk Network, when I was blessed to be introduced to him from a mutual friend of ours, when we started this podcast, he told me that would happen, and I basically called BS. I'm like, yeah, that's not going to happen, and I get around, I would say, one to probably two to three calls or texts or messages a month that someone's reaching out and going, I need help. Who do you have? Who do you know? And it is so cool, right? It's really cool. And I've had messages from even being guests on other podcasts where somebody's messaged in and said, you gave me a whole new perspective. I didn't look at it that way. And that's the message that all of us are trying to get out there, right? We're just wanting to open the blinds. We're wanting to bring in some more light into the room so people understand, and my wife and I, we've been blessed to where we've been, I think it's only two, but we've been invited to two other recovery centers here in the Salt Lake Valley where we both got up as a couple and shared our experience. Now, I didn't share anything about mine. That was still my dirty little secret, right? At that time. But I shared what it was like being on the other side. My wife shared what it was like being the addict and not realizing what she was doing to me because she was so caught up in her addiction. And also the things I did wrong, because I did a lot of things wrong. I handled things wrong. I said the wrong things. As I've said on the show many times, I worked my butt off to be her therapist when all she needed was her husband. How was I to know what she was going through? Because I was not, even though I had my own addiction, and I don't want to say this as an excuse because mine was just like on a Friday and Saturday. And really, that's all I did was a Friday and Saturday every single weekend, though, pretty much for 8 years.
Yeah.
Hers was an everyday thing. It still doesn't matter. An addiction's the addiction. Yeah. However, for me to finally come out and tell my story, I still don't understand the depth fully of where she was at. I do understand more because I get to hear stories like yours. I get to hear our other guests talk about where they went and where it took them. And it's given me a whole new perspective. And, one of our missions here on this show is also to get rid of the stigma. And you're a good example of that, Kevin, because we've said many times, addiction doesn't discriminate. You didn't start the show out by saying you came from a hard family or you had all this trauma in your life or, and some of our guests have, some of our guests haven't. And some of our guests, same thing, just like you. They had a surgery. It was the time when OxyContin was really starting to come out in the early 90s and things. And, the doctors were really pushing it because they were being pushed because they were being told it's non-addictive, right? And all these people fell into it and it damaged and destroyed and took so many lives.
Yeah. And so many casualties, so much collateral damage.
Yeah.
Because all of those lives, when you see on TV the statistic of how many people died of overdoses in your community this year to date, and you're like, wow, that's a lot. But it's an exponential number because of each one of those. There were so many ripples of lives that unfortunately have been affected by it, you know. And one of the things one of my daughters said once, and she was still relatively young, she said, "Well, I know it wasn't you, Daddy. It was your addiction." And you know,
Wow.
some of the addiction. The point is, I said, "No, honey, it was me. You know, yes, I have this addiction, but you need to understand everything that I did. Other people have been on those meds and gotten help, as I said, gotten off the train way earlier, or used them. And when the pain was gone after recovering from surgery, they were gone, and that was it. You know, there's plenty of people who don't get addicted, but I've been very careful about owning it and not putting like this third entity or this other entity where everything can get thrown. I think, like you said, removing the stigma will help us. It'll humanize us. You know, and I understand, because I probably would have been like, if I saw the story from the other side about somebody else robbed the bank and did, you know, there, I know me back then would be like, oh, what a scumbag. How could he
Yeah,
do that
right.
to these people? How could he, you know, leave his wife in such dire straits? Like you said, man, it doesn't discriminate. And I
Mhm.
did time with a lot of really different people. Far too many young men from the city, you know, whether it's addiction themselves, their family, or them being on the other side with, you know, being the dealer or what have you. But there are a lot of people in prison who had a regular life, and like you said, it doesn't discriminate, man.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't the only middle-aged, educated, uh, I won't say rich, but you know, well off white guy in there. It wasn't alone. It wasn't just me. There were plenty others.
Yeah.
There were far too many, um, like I said, younger people. It breaks your heart, but like you said, man, it happens. Addiction happens, and everybody's vulnerable. Some people get hung up and strung out, and they ride that train, man.
Yeah.
And I'm just here to maybe tell some people, you know, listen, dude, trust me, man, get off the train. You know, when your wife is on the platform reaching out to you to say, I'll like you, I'll walk this path with you, because so many of us do have, if it's not a spouse, a parent, a child. In my case, like I said, my 25-year-old was my rock. My father was a rock for me. My cousins were. And I even, when I speak, Al, I say, listen, if you don't have somebody, or you're embarrassed to go to somebody you may know, I get it. Here's my number.
Yeah.
Call me, and I'll pick up that phone, man. Because again, if it's another stop, if I'm standing on the platform and somebody goes, all right, fine, this guy's a stranger, I'm gonna get, it's worth it, man. You know?
Absolutely. So, Kevin, to wrap this thing up, uh, what would be your main message for our audience? Do you have something that you really just feel so strongly about in your gut that you'd like to say to them?
Yeah, I again, my the one word I speak daily is perspective. And it's getting to a point in each of us, and you don't have to be an addict, but just finding the space where you can take a step back sometime and just look at things maybe from a different perspective, and all kinds of things can start opening up, you know. I almost picture like this old style phone booth, you know, the glass phone booth in front of me with whatever the issue may be at hand, whatever it may be. And you're standing there looking at it. What I've now come to realize through some amazing people and helping me get there is to walk around to the other side and look at that phone booth from over there. And all of a sudden, you start becoming more aware of different ways to deal with it. And you start becoming aware of how other people are looking at the issue. And it it's a lot more peaceful, man. You
Yes.
know, it's a lot more peaceful. So it's perspective, man. It's that, and it's the I was writing a blog the other day on the Serenity Prayer and what it means, and not as a, bang bang addict, but the biggest message is, having the guts to change what you can and accept what you can't.
Yeah.
A lot to that for an addict or not an addict that's a great message. But again, the biggest thing I try to tell people is just taking a step and looking for perspective in everything. And I believe that the human spirit is capable of coming through the other end of any tragedy, no matter how hard it might be. And yeah, you'll be scarred, bloody, beaten up, but there are millions, if not billions, of stories of people getting through some hard stuff. And the human spirit can get you there, man. And if you have patience and perspective, it's awesome. It's awesome, brother.
That is a great message. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I hope there will be a day, hopefully here in the near future, man. I think it would be cool. I would love to share a stage with you and Curtis as well. Man, wouldn't that be awesome?
I don't know if I want to share with Curtis.
All three is, Chaos, a guy nicknamed Chaos,
Yeah, he might be in the shadow. You don't want to go on after that guy.
Yeah, yeah.
I would love that, man, and I would be flattered to do it, brother. I really would.
Maybe it's something we need to look into. We should. I'm doing my best not to use that S word, which is the should. We could talk about it, right? We could talk about it. Curtis is actually going to MC our event that we're holding here on April 15th. It's called the Healing Utah Success Summit. So I'm speaking. Our friend Mallory Roosh is speaking. Our producer here, the owner of Resilience Talk Network, Brad Neufeld, he's going to be speaking. And Curtis is going to MC for us, which we're very grateful that he accepted, and he's really excited about it. But I think that would be cool if we had that opportunity someday here. I think it would be great. Kevin, man, thank you so much for your time. Again, I am so grateful that we got to meet and got to know each other. I feel a very huge, strong connection, friendship, with you. Hopefully you feel the same. I believe that you do. I'm just hoping maybe somewhere down the road here that there's something we can do together and do what you were saying earlier many times through the show is just, let's see what we can do about spreading the message and helping others and letting people know, man, it's possible, right? Yeah. Recovery is possible. It's not a hopeless cause, and again, it's about perspective. And if you're tired of suffering where you're at, man, it's all about choice, right? Choose your heart. You want to choose your heart to stay in where you're at, or do you want to choose your heart to suffer and work yourself through it, not suffer, but work yourself through it to come out on the other side? Yeah. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's been humbling, and I'm so appreciative of the time.
Thank you. Well, listeners, man, this is a great show. I hope you guys enjoy it. Before we sign off, we just want to say thank you again to all our many sponsors that has helped us out and helped this studio change so doggone much. To all our listeners, all our guests co-hosts that we have come on, Resilience Talk Network, our friend Mason here, Brad's son, who's been helping us while Brad is really busy working, doing some other things. Sylvia, that's usually in the studio helping us out. Thank you guys for all your help, all your love, all your kindness. Yeah, you're helping us keeping the show going on. Like they say, the show must go on. We're doing everything we can to make sure that happens. Gosh. Oh, and I want to bring up one more thing here before we sign off. Guys, mark your calendars for Saturday, April 15th at the Miller Free Enterprise Building in Sandy, Utah, from 11 to 4:30. We're going to be holding our second annual event. Go to RooshRecovery.com to get your tickets. That's RUESCH recovery.com. Tickets are only $35. If you choose to want to get a box lunch from Apple Spice Junction, that's just an extra $12. That just pays for the lunch. That's it. That's not going to anything else. It's just paying for the lunch. Come out and hear some incredible stories and some inspiration, because you guys will be inspired. And bring your little hankies, your little tissues that a lot of the women carry in their purses, because I guarantee you're going to need them. So we're going to leave you with this as we do at the end of every show, guys. Remember, addiction is giving up everything for one thing, and recovery is giving up one thing for everything. We're out.